Hello, everyone. Good morning. Or sorry, I keep saying good morning because it's morning where I am, but good afternoon on the East Coast. Thanks for being here. We're excited to kind of formally kick off this very short process, but should be a good one. And thanks for joining us today. So you can go to the next slide. So to start, just to bring us all together, we wanted to highlight the planning team and the facilitation team, who you'll be hearing a lot from today, and then as we go forward in this process. But just to introduce myself first, since I'm talking, I'm Brian Crawford of Compass Resource Management. We're a small private consulting firm that specializes in a lot of these collaborative decision-making and natural resource planning processes. Me and my colleague, Katie O'Donnell, are going to be the facilitators of this process. I'm very excited about that. Also on the planning team, we have Caitlin Starks of ASMFC, who's the Senior Fishery Management Plan Coordinator, Tony Kearns, Director of the Interstate Fisheries Management Program, and Samara Nehemiah, who's the Stock Assessment Scientist helping out for ASMFC. We're also joined today by a few of the ARM subcommittee members. You'll hear from John Suika later today from Fish and Wildlife Service, and Jim Lyons of USGS, Connor McGowan, USGS, and Brian Noose of the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. You'll hear from John today. The rest of those fellows have been helping to kind of plan this process and dig into a lot of the technical details. So you'll probably encounter them later on in the process. So I think we can go to the next slide. Great. So what do we want to do today? Well, we have 2 hours together. We're going to do a bit of just process overview at the start, kind of orient people to what we're doing today versus later in the process, and then really turn it over to Caitlin and John to give the first formal educational session, mostly focused just to start things off, build a foundation of understanding of the management context and ASMFC, and then also what the adaptive resource management framework does and how it's different than other kind of management approaches. And we'll end today with a cursory overview of these values functions in the ARM model that are called the utility, reward, and harvest functions that really capture stakeholder values of what matters and how much things matter, and what's being kind of looked at to get to a good and reasonable decision recommendation for the system. There'll be a lot of opportunity for Q&A. That's what we want from these sessions. We're gonna, for the sake of time, have a little bit of Q&A after Caitlin goes, but please forgive us to be pretty ruthless in that. We're gonna have about 5 minutes there, but then we'll come back with a longer Q&A session at the end after John goes, just to manage time. Another word on just the questions, we'll get to it I think in the next slide, but please use the question box on the right as you go, and we will be collecting those questions, even if we don't respond to all of them in this meeting, which we might not have time to. We can follow up with you afterwards. So please use the question box. We will be collecting those. When we do have questions, please raise your hand and we'll get to you. And then we will, like at those designated question times, we'll sort of have a queue of hands, call on you, and when we call on you, you can unmute yourself. Thanks, Katie. I know I'm jumping around a little, but yeah, use the microphone button to unmute yourself. When it's green, it means you're unmuted. And then after you speak, you can mute yourself again. Your icon will turn red, and then you can lower your hand in that icon. Let's see, I think there's all the logistics. I guess the other thing to mention with questions, just the housekeeping of, we have a mix of people here. We have this core group of active participants that are going to be involved throughout the process, and then we have other folks on the line, which thanks to everyone for joining. We're going to be prioritizing like verbal questions from the active participants and then get to others as needed. So I think that's the only bit of housekeeping that I missed there. Anything else from Katie or the planning team, logistics wise?
None from my end.
I would just add that when we do get to questions, and if anyone's having trouble with their audio and we can't hear you, we'll ask you to just write your question into the questions box to save time. And unfortunately, sometimes it's a little tricky to get your audio working correctly. So we'll just resort to the questions box in those cases.
Thanks, Gail. Let's go to the next slide and just center us on sort of our objectives for today. So today, what we want to accomplish is a couple things. Our real main goal is to get everyone on the same page. This is a complicated management problem and technical kind of system that's been laid out. We want to start building that foundation of understanding so that everyone in the room, even though we come from different backgrounds and different levels of experience with this stuff, we start to build the same understanding of it. Which is involved in horseshoe crab management in Delaware Bay. So we want to build that shared understanding. We want to kind of demystify the ARM model for many of you. We're not trying to turn you into mathematicians, but we want you to be able to understand at least the concepts that are involved in this model, specifically, again, those value-based functions that we call the utility, reward, and harvest function. We also want to allow that dialogue in this session and definitely the next session between participants and the modelers to just answer questions and firm up that foundation of understanding of what the model does and how it translates your values into math and into recommendations. And then ultimately, we want to prepare the group for January. So in late January, we're going to meet together and do an in-person workshop in Maryland where we actually dive in and elicit some of those values and think about what aspects of the model need updating to better reflect your values. Next slide. As we set off in this process, we always like to throw up these sort of principles of how we work together. We know people are coming from different backgrounds and interests. And in a group like this, those different perspectives are a feature, not a bug, if everyone can kind of agree to the same set of principles of how we work together. So just a few are highlighted here. This probably won't come up today, but certainly in the workshop, we really want to, we want some solutions-minded folks that are really there to kind of solve problems together rather than put up roadblocks for each other. And we'll help each other out with that. Today, the second one is going to be really important, just be efficient. We want to hear from everyone or as many people as possible. So take space, make space, we often say. And then the third one, of course, is the most important. And it's really required that we give each other grace, respect each other, even if people are coming from different places, and act in good faith in the process. And we just wanted to highlight on the right that the participants of this process, everybody's agreed to these principles already. So thank you so much for doing that and making that commitment. And we will, we'll be kind of reflecting on these as we go. And even when things get a little messy, these are the principles that we're going to return to in the workshop. Next slide. So I keep talking about this workshop. This is how we get there. We're at sort of that second stage in this process. We've met with the active participants already. Katie and I had some really good small group discussions with you, which was really informative for a lot of reasons, and just great to meet you all. We're at the educational session stage right now. Again, we've already covered what the goal of that is, and that's in prep for the late January values workshop in Maryland, where we're prioritizing aspects of the model to update and better reflect participants' values. There'll be a lot of really rich discussions and good outcomes and recommendations from that workshop. There's going to be some next steps that are needed following it. So from February to May in the next year, we're going to be doing a couple of things, including translating the in-person workshop outcomes and recommendations into the model. We're probably going to touch base with you all to reflect sort of a draft of how those values have been incorporated into updates to the model, and then produce a report that can be shared widely, capturing the outcomes of this process by May. So that's a bit of what's on the horizon. Okay. So with all that background, I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
All right, thanks, Brian, for walking us through that first part. Just a couple other slides we want to go through to kind of set the tone for the day and just remind ourselves of the broader context that we're working in and that this process is housed within. So you'll see the slide again a little bit later, but just wanted to orient everybody to the what we often call the objective statement, which is kind of the driving statement behind this entire adaptive resource management framework, which is in blue here. So it's to manage the harvest of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay, to maximize harvest, but also to maintain ecosystem integrity, provide adequate stopover habitat for migrating shorebirds, and to ensure that the abundance of horseshoe crabs is not limiting the red knot stopover population or slowing their recovery. A few things that we wanted to point out, or just remind everybody about, are that, and I think John will emphasize these first few, that this is a multi-species approach to managing the horseshoe crab bait fishery. This framework incorporates several different population models for horseshoe crabs and shorebirds, and we'll talk a little bit about those later today. This is a really important one, that the decision maker, the ultimate decision maker for this problem, the way that this problem is framed, is the ASMFC Management Board. They have the ultimate authority over how many horseshoe crabs are harvested in a given year. And some other, pieces of the context that we've heard a lot of interest about, but that we just wanted to reiterate, are that, habitat conservation decisions, while they're really important, are outside of the purview of ASMFC. And red knot recovery, so other actions that might be, implemented in order to achieve red knot recovery, that's under the purview of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So just kind of orienting everybody into kind of what is the decision that within that context, then what's the decision that we're really focusing on in this process. So to make this workshop process successful, we need to be really clear about what we can and can't change in this specific workshop. So sometimes we'll put together a diagram like this just to emphasize what are some prior decisions that are things that are out of scope for this workshop. So in this case, I think we've said this in all our small group conversations as well, but this process is not about relitigating the fundamental population science or the structure of the ARM framework itself. And it's also, again, related to that last slide, we're not going to address things that fall outside of the authority of ASMFC, as much as we know that those are important and really critical factors. The decision that is in scope that we're really focusing on is on the values, and we keep using that word, and we'll have to keep reminding everybody what we mean by that. It's like, what are the priorities that need to be reflected in the model structure? So we're really saying, given the current model structure, what are the relative priorities of the stakeholders, and how should the model say the value of harvest versus the value of abundance? So this is where your influence is going to be really direct and really impactful. And lastly, we just wanted to take a minute and reflect on some of the themes that we heard during our small group discussions. As Brian said, we had some really candid conversations. that were really, really helpful in helping to, kind of craft the agenda for this this session and just help us, wrap our arms around the problem and the context. We heard a few themes that came up that we just wanted to acknowledge right up front. So first one, is just about the complexity of the model, right? That, we heard loud and clear that this model is dense. There's a lot to understand. And, we heard from a lot of you, that, hey, I need a really simple explanation for this. And so we've tailored this session today, and we'll do the same with the ones in January, specifically to address this. However, we'll need your feedback, right? So if things aren't making sense, please, please, please let us know. Make use of that question box. Give us feedback after today. Let us know, what's working, what's not. We definitely need that kind of feedback. The second thing are, the idea of missing pieces. Like we've heard concerns from various groups that, the model doesn't account for everything. So things like, habitat loss or egg density data. We will spend some time discussing why the model focuses on what it does and how some of these interests have been evaluated in the past or explored in the past, and how the model currently handles those uncertainties. But we, just for the sake of time, we'll have to limit the amount of time that we spend on this. And, as John especially will emphasize today, the model is always being updated. And so, like, we will be tracking things that we hear that are potentially flags that the ARM committee could revisit in the future or consider. But that won't be the focus of the process. We also heard some concerns that the model feels too utilitarian, right? That it's treating crabs only as a resource to be harvested. And so one of the things we'll talk about today is we'll look at how the reward function and the utility function, includes the value of the ecosystem and the birds, and we'll kind of look at those connections in the model and how those are currently represented. And again, in January, we can discuss, options for potentially, addressing this concern that it feels a little too utilitarian. And the last point that we'll make is that, most importantly, we heard from you all about the history here. We know some of you have been involved in horseshoe crab management workshops or things in the past. And everybody, as Brian said, everybody's coming in with a different level of experience. So we want to, really watch out for this. That anyway, we've heard that some of you have felt disrespected or picked on in past meetings, and we just we'll keep reminding everybody that we've all agreed to respect each other and really put in the work to understand other people's perspectives in this process. So we just want to be really clear that we're here to solve a problem together, and we really expect everybody to challenge the ideas and not the people, and to treat all the different perspectives in the room as a valid piece of the puzzle and an important component of this framework. So we have heard a lot of great interest. We were excited to see so many people interested in participating in this process. And we really appreciate everybody's time that you've already put in and that you'll put in over the next few months. So with that, I'm trying to advance the slide. There we go. Okay. With that foundation set out, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin Starks now, who will give us a high-level overview of the ASMFC management context and how we got here. And I will turn off my camera and turn it over to you, Caitlin.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Can you hear me? Perfect. So thanks again. And for my section here, I just want to start off with a broader overview of the commission and what its purpose is and role in fisheries management and how it functions. So the commission, or ASMFC, is an interstate body that develops fishery management plans for Atlantic coast fisheries resources. And in total, the commission oversees the management of 27 coastal fishery resources, and horseshoe crab is just one of those. So the overarching purpose of the commission is to serve as a deliberative forum for the 15 Atlantic states to cooperatively develop management programs that aim to achieve the shared goals for sustainability, conservation, and equitable use of those fishery resources. So for each species the commission manages, there is a management board, which is made up of representatives of the states with an interest in that fishery. And that board directs the development of the management program. So for horseshoe crabs, that includes the states of Massachusetts through Florida. And when the states on a management board agree to a set of management measures for a particular fishery by approving a fishery management plan, amendment, or addendum, the states and jurisdictions then have the responsibility to go home and implement and enforce those measures in their state waters or jurisdictional waters. And this overarching governance structure and obligation for state fishery management through the commission is established by the Atlantic Coastal Fisheries Cooperative Management Act, and that was approved in 1993. The commission's decision-making process typically operates through quarterly meetings where the various species management boards meet to consider changes to the fishery management plans. And each state is represented on a management board by 3 commissioners, with each state getting 1 vote on management decisions. And another key aspect of the process is public input. So on any management change under consideration, the board's required to solicit input from stakeholders via public hearings or written comments and comments provided during the quarterly board meetings. And this graphic here is just showing all of the Atlantic states and noting the different regions of management for horseshoe crabs specifically. And obviously this process is focused on the Delaware Bay region, but there are 3 other regions for horseshoe crabs that the commission deals with. So now we can get a little more specific for horseshoe crab management for the Delaware Bay region. And again, that management board is the overarching body that makes decisions about the regional and coastwide management measures. And you can advance, Katie, sorry. So that management board is responsible for the management of horseshoe crab fisheries on the Atlantic coast. And in addition to the 3 commissioners from each state, the horseshoe crab board also includes the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Fisheries, and the Potomac River Fisheries Commission as voting members. And every species management board at the commission is supported by several committees. These include an advisory panel, which is made up of stakeholders from the fishing industry or others with relevant expertise. And the AP provides guidance to the management board based on their knowledge of the fisheries on management options. And each board also has specific species technical committees, which are made up of biologists from the states that are participating in that management board. And those TCs provide scientific advice and analysis to the board to support the development of fishery management measures. Now for horseshoe crab, there's an additional specialized technical committee, which is specific to the Delaware Bay region, and that is the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC, or DBETC. And this group is different from a typical technical committee at the commission because it includes both horseshoe crab and shorebird biologists from New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And this group has the specific task of reviewing the scientific information and analyses, including the ARM framework, and making management recommendations to the board for the Delaware Bay region. And then there's the ARM, or Adaptive Resource Management Subcommittee, which is a subset of the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC, plus a few additional scientists with expertise in the modeling methods used for the ARM framework. And this group developed and implements the ARM framework to provide annual model-based harvest limits for the Delaware Bay horseshoe crab fishery. And the output from the ARM framework is reviewed by the DBETC, which also then recommends the harvest limits to the board. And then the board ultimately decides what harvest quotas to implement each year. That annual process looks like this. And following along with this figure on an annual basis, we start in April with the ARM subcommittee compiling the survey data for horseshoe crab and red knots. That gets input into the ARM framework. And then the ARM subcommittee runs the model with all of those data around August, which it provides, then provides the bait harvest limits for the following year based on the most current survey data for birds and horseshoe crabs. And the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC then meets in September, reviews the results of the annual ARM run, and provides a recommendation to the management board for the bait harvest quotas for the next year. And at the commission's annual meeting, which is usually in late October or early November, the management board reviews the results of the ARM and the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC's recommendations, and it decides on the harvest quotas for New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. So under the current management program, next slide, the ARM framework is used to provide optimal bait harvest limits for male and female horseshoe crabs to achieve the established objective of the ARM based on the current state of the system, i.e. the populations of horseshoe crabs and red knots. And those harvest limits are capped with maximum levels of harvest for males and females at 500,000 males and 210,000 females. And those caps were established when the ARM was originally adopted in 2012. So the annual harvest limits produced by the ARM cannot exceed those values. And another thing to note is that once the ARM provides specific values for the male and female bait harvest limits, let's say those values that it spits out are 120,000 females and 460,000 males, those values get rounded down to the nearest 25,000 to protect proprietary data that are confidential under state and federal laws. So that 120,000 and 460,000 would become 100,000 and 450,000, and those would be the numbers being considered by the board. So then finally, once the board approves an overall harvest limit for males and females for the Delaware Bay region, that total gets allocated amongst the 4 states based on the state's harvest quotas prior to the implementation of the ARM framework, and genetic information on the proportion of each state's harvest that is considered to be part of the Delaware Bay population of horseshoe crabs. And that's because some of the take of crabs in Maryland and Virginia actually comes from the Southeast regional population, one of the other populations I mentioned, and not the Delaware Bay population of horseshoe crabs, which is the focus of the ARM framework. Next slide. So to recap on that, when the board meets in the fall, it reviews the ARM framework output and the recommendations from the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC, and it sets the harvest limits for the following calendar year. And the board does have the ability to set harvest limits lower than the ARM output for both males and females. And it has done this over the last several years when it's chosen to set female harvest limits at 0, even though the ARM output has been around 175,000 females. And this decision can be based on a number of factors, but the recent decisions by the board to forego any female harvest of Delaware Bay origin have been in part due to significant public input opposing female harvest at this time and a desire to further address concerns from stakeholders about the ARM before allowing any female harvest. So the management program also has provisions specific to when no female harvest is allowed. And if the board chooses not to implement female harvest, or if the ARM output does not allow for female harvest, then the board could allow for an offset where the male harvest limit is increased above the cap by 2 males for each single female that would have been allowed. And this is specific for Maryland and Virginia because, again, those 2 states have some harvest that is not of Delaware Bay population origin. So they're losing out on those female harvests in the scenario of 0 female harvest. And I'm just going to go over a timeline showing the development of the ARM framework and changes over time. So the development of the ARM framework started before 2008, after the Commission's Fishery Management Plan for Horseshoe Crab was approved in 1998. And there were years of conversations among the board and technical committees about needing a multi-species management approach to address this specific unique ecological needs in the Delaware Bay region. So in 2009, the original ARM framework development was completed, and it underwent an independent peer review process. And so to implement the use of that new ARM framework for setting bait harvest limits for the Delaware Bay states, the Horseshoe Crab Board approved Addendum 7 Addendum 7 to the Fishery Management Plan in 2012. And then from 2013 to 2021, the bait harvest limits were set using that original ARM framework. And then in 2021, a revision of the ARM framework was completed that updated and improved the models with new data and software, and another independent peer review occurred. And the timing of this was related to the timing of the coast-wide stock assessment that had been completed for horseshoe crab in 2019. So during that coast-wide assessment, which involved pulling together all of the data for horseshoe crab, it became clear that there were now enough data to update the ARM framework. So that's why after the 2019 coast-wide stock assessment was completed, work began to revise the ARM. So after the ARM revision was completed and reviewed, the board adopted it by approving Addendum 8 in 2022. And then for 2023 onwards, the board used the revised ARM framework to set the bait harvest specifications for the Delaware Bay. However, again, it's important to note here that the board has chosen to implement 0 female harvest in those years, as I mentioned on the last slide. And John Sweeko will talk more about that in a few minutes. And then in 2024, the board began a stakeholder engagement process with a workshop in July 2024 to discuss the management objectives of the ARM framework. And the process that we're going through now is building on those recommendations that came out of that workshop, which specifically were to consider changes to the value-based functions of the ARM to better align with the current stakeholder interests. And after this process, the expectation is that another update to the ARM framework will occur to make those recommended changes. And there's a couple things to take away with this on the bigger picture. So one is that this adaptive management process is a continuous thing that is meant to continually update and improve the ARM framework as more information becomes available or as stakeholder values and goals change. Second is that this process is held to a high scientific standard with these independent peer reviews, which are conducted by panels of external experts in horseshoe crab and shorebird biology, as well as ecology and population dynamics. And third, built into this process of developing and implementing the ARM framework, there are many opportunities for public input, including public comment periods on the addenda that have implemented the ARM and at the board and committee meetings as well. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the ARM framework is meant to be continually updated and improved with new information at several timescales. So there are the annual updates, there are the interim updates that would occur every 3 years, and then broader ARM revisions meant to occur every 9 years or so. Next slide. So in that annual timescale, new survey data for horseshoe crabs and red knots, as well as landings data from the biomedical and bait removals are added into the ARM framework to provide updated harvest limits for the bait fishery. And then for the interim update process, which is to occur every 3 years, updates would include changes to the model parameters like red knot survival and recruitment rates and horseshoe crab recruitment levels based on additional data that are continually collected in the Delaware Bay region. And then every 9 years or so, which would be every third interim update, there would be a broader revision process similar to what occurred in 2021. And this would include stakeholder input, review of the models by the ARM subcommittee and the technical committees, which would then provide recommendations to the management board for changes. And for bigger changes to the models, the board would have to implement a new addendum to the FMP to adopt them formally. And then the revised ARM framework would be used for management until the next cycle. So now I'll pass it over to John Sweeko to talk more in detail about the ARM framework itself.
Hey, Caitlin, thanks for that. I was just noting, with the time we have, we do have time to pause and take a couple of questions, not many, but maybe just wanted to open up an opportunity if people have any questions around what they've heard so far. Happy to take a few questions so far. Please raise your hand or put them in the chat.
Carly, I see your hand up if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, you were saying that if they choose to not harvest females, the board, that Maryland and Virginia are able to harvest more males as a result because they are collecting a portion of the Southeast population as well. Does the Southeast region also harvest horseshoe crabs, and does that impact what they are allowed to harvest?
That's a good question. So the harvest levels in the Southeast are a lot lower. There's not as big of horseshoe crab fisheries in the Southeast region, and it does not impact what those states are able to harvest if there's a 2-to-1 offset in the Delaware Bays in Maryland and Virginia. I'll just note too, and John will talk about this, but the harvest levels in general have been below, for all of states, have been below the quotas that are in place by ASMFC. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. While we're waiting, any other questions for Caitlin on kind of the just the overall history of the ARM and the development and kind of how decisions are made, or whose purview or what decisions?
Yeah, I see a hand from Dave Mizrahi.
Hey, Caitlin, I was just wondering, is there a place on the ASMFC website that shows the roster of people who participate in the Delaware Bay Ecosystem Tech Committee?
There is, and I'm happy to send out a link afterwards, but for each of our species committees, there's a page where you can find links to each roster for every committee. So I can send out links to that after this.
Yeah, that would be great, because I've been digging around on the website, and I can see the Horseshoe Crab Tech Committee members, I can see the advisory panel members, but I couldn't find the Ecosystem Tech Committee members.
Yeah,
that's just because I mean, you guys, make a point of saying that there are horseshoe crab and shorebird biologists on that, and it's useful to see who's participating in those endeavors. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I also see Stuart Potter has a hand up, but actually Joanna's unmuted. So why don't we go to Joanna first and then Stuart?
Oh, I didn't know I couldn't just unmute. Sorry, I think it might be useful to know who's on the call also. Is that possible or is that not possible?
You should be able to see the attendee list. It's set so that you should be able to see it, but depending on your computer setup, I don't know. There should be an attendees drop down where you can see the list.
I don't see that,
but it might take me a while to list everyone because there are, about a little more than 40 folks on here, including folks who have been selected to participate in this process actively, and then also members of the technical committees, board members, and other folks who are interested. So I'll be able to post a list of attendance later, but it would be kind of long to read it out now. All right, Stuart, you can unmute yourself.
You got me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to see if you could explain the 2-to-1 offset, why Delaware isn't included in that.
Yeah, so basically Delaware's harvest is all part of the Delaware Bay population. And so with the ARM framework being used to set harvest levels for the Delaware Bay population states, including New Jersey through Virginia, we have the genetic information about what % of each state's harvest comes from the Delaware Bay population. And for Delaware, it's all Delaware Bay. So the harvest, when the board decides we're not going to implement any female harvest in the Delaware Bay population region, Delaware is already not going to harvest any females because of that. But for Virginia and Maryland, who would otherwise have been able to harvest a few females, they get that offset to make up for that loss of harvest. Because there's a portion, yeah, so Virginia, I don't remember exactly what the percentages are, but for Virginia, it's higher than Maryland, but there's a proportion of the total harvest that comes from outside the Delaware Bay population.
So it doesn't have anything to do with just the last addendum not allowing any female harvest.
Yeah, it's because of the proportioned genetically.
Okay.
Because if in an alternate scenario, if the board did implement female harvest for the Delaware Bay region, then Delaware would have the opportunity to harvest some females according to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Good questions. Thanks, everyone.
Check back in with John.
Okay. So if we can, so again, you know, just to introduce myself, I'm John Sweeka. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I've been chair of the ARM subcommittee for a number of years now, and was the chair during the last revision of it. So to get started, just to refresh everybody's memory, again, what Katie had gone over earlier, you know, our objective statement here for the Adaptive Resource Management Framework is to manage harvest horseshoe crabs in Delaware Bay, but also on top of that is we don't want to, we want to maximize harvest, but we also don't want to do anything that would limit red knots, their population growth or their populations. And again, you know, the key details that we have to keep in mind in this framework is that the ASMFC Management Board is the decision maker, and you know, ultimately has authority over how many horseshoe crabs can be harvested. Now, at the state level, a state is always free to reduce harvest even more than what ASMFC recommends. Other issues that may affect both crabs and birds are really beyond the scope of ASMFC management decisions. So this entire framework is really built around the understanding that ASMFC Management Board is the decision maker. So next slide, Katie. So why should we adopt an adaptive management approach? Well, single species management really ignores dependencies of one species on another. In a typical fishery, traditionally what we've tried to manage for in fisheries management is maximum sustainable yield. So that's where you can harvest the maximum amount of the species into perpetuity, and you won't overfish the species to where it will never rebound again. So this really is how traditionally we've managed fisheries on a single species basis. However, though, it may reduce the population to some level that negatively impacts other species. So in our case, we don't want to impact red knots. So an ARM approach also promotes learning and incorporation of uncertainty into our decision making. And it also promotes critical thinking about how the system works and tests hypotheses. Ultimately, our underlying population dynamics models are hypotheses about how the system works, and we see how those hypotheses pan out through time, and we revise them. It directly incorporates routine monitoring data. So the data that's been collected for years and years in the Delaware Bay system is directly input into the ARM framework, and it's also how we can easily update our population models using the new data. And the big thing, the real purpose for why we're all here today and into the next few meetings, is to transparently incorporate stakeholder values into that decision making. There is a misconception that the ARM framework is or should be or should act as a simple harvest control rule. And when I say a harvest control rule, basically just imagine, you know, this diagram here where we say below some abundance of red knots or horseshoe crabs, there will be no harvest. Once we you know, get above some threshold, then harvest may increase up to the maximum at some point. So the big question with a simple harvest control rule like this is that, you know, we can negotiate these threshold values where harvest may change, but how do we determine where they are? Is it just simply a negotiation amongst stakeholders? And it begs the question, well, are they really an optimal solution given the values that stakeholders really hold? And how do they get updated as we learn more, as we collect more information and revise our models? And if we really want to start, if we want to base these thresholds on something that is based in biology or population dynamics, then we ultimately end up talking ourselves back into an ARM approach. So from our workshop last summer in July of 2024, there really was consensus among all stakeholder groups that everybody wishes to continue with an adaptive management approach and not revert to something such as a simple harvest control rule. So that's what you know, brings us to where we are today.
Sorry, I'm lagging on the slide transitions.
Okay, so here's our timeline that Caitlin had presented earlier, and we'll go through this a little quicker this time. And what I really want to focus on is, as we've gone through time and the ARM has developed, the peer reviews of the ARM framework. Now, the peer reviews, that occurred from the original ARM framework in 2009, and then again in 2021. When ASMFC conducts a peer review of any stock assessment, these really are very rigorous peer reviews. They contract or hire some outside experts who have expertise in the species that's being reviewed. And in our case, for horseshoe crabs and red knots, each of those 2 peer review panels consisted of a shorebird expert, a fisheries population assessment or stock assessment expert, and also experts in adaptive management and structured decision making. And so the peer review process is very rigorous. I mean, you can essentially what it's like is defending your dissertation for 2 to 3 days in a row. So it is a rigorous process, and the peer review panel has provided some very useful input to us both times. In the ARM revision, we tried to take what the original peer review panel recommended and make some updates. And in this latest peer review, one of their recommendations, and something that they didn't really comment too much on, were those value-laden decisions that are incorporated in the framework. And it was appropriate that they really didn't weigh in too much on those, because those are ultimately up to the stakeholders. And they encouraged us to make sure that the utility, as Katie mentioned earlier, the utility functions and the reward functions, they encouraged us to really make sure that those represent the values of the stakeholders. So that's really why we're here today and then into the next few sessions. So why do we need to revise the ARM? We've been running for quite a few years and making harvest recommendations off of it. Well, as Caitlin explained, after the 2019 coastwide horseshoe crab stock assessment, we realized we had a lot more data that was now specific to Delaware Bay. In the original ARM framework, the original population dynamics models for horseshoe crabs and red knots were largely theoretical and based on literature values coming from other areas. We also wanted to address the concerns from the original peer review panel, and we now had the data to do that. This revision also allowed for better alignment of population dynamics models with the monitoring data and population estimation. So they're really all one and the same. Same technique, same model structure, and assume the same dynamics and everything. Also, the previous version of the ARM framework used some software that's now obsolete. And over the years, we gained knowledge in optimization approaches and better techniques to find the optimal solution. Also, this revision was our chance to address unintentional problems with the previous utility functions, which we'll certainly dive into as we move through the stakeholder process. So at a very high level, how the ARM operates is represented by this overarching conceptual diagram. We have how many crabs and how many birds, how many are there now, how many are there in the future. This information gets fed into the value side of things. So how happy are we with the number of crabs, or how happy are we with the number of red knots that are stopping over? These value things get combined into that box there that basically says what is the relative value of both crab harvest and red knot abundance combined. And this is the reward part. And ultimately, out of that, we try to maximize the reward, and we get an answer that tells us, given the population sizes of horseshoe crabs and red knots, how many horseshoe crabs should be harvested. Once that decision is made, or once that, well, it's not the decision, once that recommendation is made by the ARM subcommittee, it goes through the Delaware TC, or Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC, up to the management board. The management board then makes the harvest decision. the actual harvest is implemented, and then we're back to the beginning on an annual basis. So now we'll take a little deeper dive in each one of these components. We'll start with the horseshoe crab component. How many crabs are there now and in the future? And obviously this is comprised of a couple different parts. So we look at the number of horseshoe crabs, and how that is estimated is with a model that combines information from 3 different trawl surveys: the Delaware Bay trawl, the New Jersey Ocean trawl, and the Virginia Tech trawl, which is specifically designed to capture horseshoe crabs. The model then estimates or also accounts for discards from other fisheries. These are dead discards that may be caught as bycatch in other fisheries and subsequently die, the bait landings that are actually observed, and any mortality that may come from the biomedical industry. So these 3, 2 of these three things, the discards and biomedical mortality, they were totally ignored in the original ARM framework, but now we have a means to incorporate them into our population estimation for horseshoe crabs. And this model is known as the Catch Multiple Survey Analysis, or CMSA for the abbreviation. And it's used for both the current estimates of crabs each year, and then the model structure of the CMSA is used to then simulate and project the population into the future. Okay, and this is just a couple graphs showing how the population of horseshoe crabs has changed in the Delaware Bay through time. So the 2 graphs on the left demonstrate or show the Virginia Tech trawl survey. Originally, we used to estimate the population size by the average catch per tow from Virginia Tech, and then knowing the amount of area that was sampled by each trawl, we then would calculate an average density of crabs, and then expand that average density up to the entire area of the Delaware Bay population. The line in blue are the estimates that come out of the Catch Multiple Survey Analysis model that also includes the effects, or also includes the crabs that are removed from the population through bait, biomedical, and dead discards, and it includes additional survey information from New Jersey and Delaware. And you can see the 2 track fairly well, and obviously they should, because Virginia Tech is one of the inputs into the CMSA. But the thing to note on these 2 graphs on the left is that you see in the early part of the time series, from when we started in 2003 up through 2010, 2011, we were at a relatively low abundance, and then after 2010, both males and females have increased in abundance over the last decade. Now the graph on the right comes from a recent publication. It was just published here back in November. It came out in press. And this was just an overall abundance of horseshoe crabs. What we did in this peer-reviewed publication was we looked at more surveys for horseshoe crabs coming from the Delaware Bay area, and we were able to extend those back in time because we just grouped sexes together. Prior to 2003, other surveys, the Virginia Tech survey wasn't in existence yet, and other surveys didn't partition their catches of horseshoe crabs by males and females. It was just the information we had was just a combined sex index. So what this did was this used some statistical modeling to combine a number of surveys together for sexes combined, and we were able to then go back in time to come up with an abundance index of crabs going back to 1990. And the horizontal line there demonstrates the 1990 abundance, because that has been suggested as a period we should try to restore horseshoe crab populations to. So as you can see, crab numbers went down through time through the early 2000s at low levels between around 2005, and then after 2010, again, horseshoe crab numbers have increased, and we're almost back up to the 1990 level of horseshoe crabs, and there's a 30, currently this analysis ended in 2023. As of 2023, there was a 38% chance of meeting or exceeding the same level of abundance as in 1990.
Quick clarification question in the chat box. Danielle was asking this, noted that the Virginia Tech data shows this spike at the end. Is that
Yeah.
a data point that's off the chart, like literally off the charts?
It's Katie, it is literally off the charts. What happened in 2023 for the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey was in the fall of 2023, they had some very huge catches of horseshoe crabs, which then once you calculate an average catch per tow, expand that up, it resulted in a very, very high swept area or Virginia Tech estimate of abundance. And I'll be honest, it's a sampling issue, just a random sampling effect. We certainly don't believe that horseshoe crab, female horseshoe crabs were well above 25 million in that year. So the one nice thing about the catch survey analysis model is that it helps to, when you have these oddball years in any of the surveys, it helps to dampen that effect of that one, seemingly outlier data point. So yeah, I mean, it literally was off the charts.
Okay, thanks, John, and thanks.
So something that is brought up a lot is why we don't include egg density data, and or we should include egg density data. There's a lot of concern about egg densities on the beaches. It is difficult. We've had a lot of discussions over the years about egg density data, and but one thing that is nice to see is coming from a publication in 2022 by Smith et al., where they published the recent egg densities. It's really great to see that the trend in egg density does mirror the trends in female horseshoe crab abundance. Again, just like the trawl surveys, Virginia Tech, when we put them all together within the CMSA, we have a low period, around 2005 to 2010, and then after 2010, we see an increase in egg densities right along with the increase in abundance of horseshoe crabs. So, I mean, it's a good check that this does seem to be a reliable increase. Although the egg density data does show a bit more year-to-year variation than what crab abundance does. Okay, so moving on to the red knot side of the model. How many red knots are stopping in Delaware Bay now, and how many can we expect in the future? And this is also made up of several component parts. So what we do is we look at data from the Markery site surveys, and Jim Lyons is actually the scientist that crunches these numbers and comes up with a stopover population estimate. So this is an estimate of the number of birds that an estimate of the total number of birds that stops over in the Delaware Bay throughout the stopover season. Obviously, there's turnover of birds. As birds come in, some birds are leaving. And in general, the Markery site population estimates are greater than what we might see in the peak aerial surveys that are conducted each year. So we have the Markery site data, we have aerial ground counts, horseshoe crab spawning surveys, and the Arctic snow. These all get put into what's known as an integrated population model, which is used to estimate survival or estimate survival of red knots as a function of horseshoe crabs. And survival within the integrated population model is dependent upon horseshoe crab population size, the timing of horseshoe crab populations, or the timing of horseshoe crab spawning relative to when the birds are in the area, and also we take into account Arctic snow cover, because that can have an effect on recruitment of future red knots. So the same integrated population model is also then simulated into the future, to get an idea of what we might expect as we move forward. So just a little bit about the life cycle of red knots. As we all know, red knots are very wide, or have a very long migration. And what we see in Delaware Bay is really only just a snapshot of their full life cycle. So within the integrated population model, I mean, it infers recruitment, for those life stages that we really don't see. So we can observe adult red knots as they stop over in the bay. They eventually go up to the Arctic to breed, lay their eggs, but we really don't have a good index on eggs or survival from egg to hatch to the juveniles. But within the integrated population model, we're able to infer these or indirectly measure them. And this is just a graph of the red knot stopover abundance coming from the mark resite model through time. And you can see we've been, it's fluctuated a bit up and down, but relatively stable over the time period. One thing to note is in 2020 and for some years after, the confidence intervals on our population estimate have increased. Well, the reason why is it's the pandemic's impact upon the number of birds out there with flags on them. So if a lower proportion of the population that are flagged and recited, that just like any mark recapture sort of model, it's going to increase our confidence intervals. So this is just another example of a species and monitoring work that was impacted somewhat by the pandemic. But we've seen in the last couple of years, the abundance estimates have increased, and we're up over 50,000 birds in the 2025 estimate. So what I described, what I just described is how the ARM framework works overall. But on an annual basis, we really don't need all that information. We don't have to run the entire ARM framework model. Once we have, like in 2019 or 2021, when we revised it, we ran the optimization and we ended up getting, to the yellow box, for a method for saying how many crabs could be harvested given the abundance of crabs and birds. Since then, on an annual basis, the inputs that we need are really just the output from the catch multiple survey analysis model, which estimates the number of crabs, and then the mark resite data, and we can go directly to that yellow box there to then tell us how many crabs could be harvested. And again, that recommendation gets passed on to the ASMFC management board. They make a decision, and to allow for some actual harvest that's implemented, and it goes back up. The actual harvest that's implemented gets back up into the input into the catch multiple survey analysis model. So the thing to really keep in mind is the ARM framework is separated into two major components. The first on the left are the technical components that really describe the biology and the science behind crab and bird populations, their dynamics, and how they interact. On the right are the value judgments, and this is the important part for the stakeholder involvement in this process. How happy are we with the number of crabs and birds, and then when we bring them together, what's the relative value of horseshoe crab harvest and red knot abundance at a given point in time? And then finally, that gets, that's what we really want to try to maximize. We want to maximize that combined value of those two. And that allows us then to say, okay, given what we see this year, how many can be harvested? Next slide. We'll dive into those value judgments a little bit more here. So the first two components, are happiness with crab harvest and bird abundance. Now, this is known as a utility. And these are, the graph here just gives an example of how utility might change as a function of either species abundance or allowable harvest. There could be a lot of, it could be the case that utility or happiness, increases slowly, and then once you get up to some level, then it starts to increase rapidly. It could just increase linearly along that entire continuum, or maybe when you're at low harvest or abundance, you're happy, and then the rate at which your happiness increases kind of wanes through time. So we could have various forms of utility functions that go into the model for both crab harvest and for bird abundance, and that's what we want to eventually elicit and revise with input from all the stakeholders. And then we have the reward. This is where the utility from horseshoe crab harvest and red knot abundance comes together to form a total value for the system. In the ideal world, in the perfect world, we would want to be able to harvest the maximum allowable amount of horseshoe crabs and also have red knots at a very high abundance. If we can do that, then both the all stakeholder groups would reach their the maximum of their happiness level. You know, the bait fishers and dealers, you know, have ample crabs that they can harvest, and conservationists are you know, feel at ease because bird abundance is high. You know, currently, you know, if bird abundance is above 81,900, that's the way the utility function's built now. So the whole purpose of the ARM framework is to try to move us from our current state of the system to a situation where, you know, we get this, where we can maximize harvest and still have, you know, high bird abundance. That's where we want to ultimately get to, and our recommendations for harvest are supposed to push us in that direction. And the thing to note is that the ARM maximizes the reward over the long term, not just this year. So it's over the long term, you know, 100-year time horizon. You know, what's the best thing that we can, you know, what's the best harvest we could implement today to get us to a maximum reward in the long term? And then, you know, given a series of continual harvest recommendations year after year, what's the best sort of strategy? And that's where we end up with our harvest. You know, what is our optimal harvest? You know, given the population size of horseshoe crabs and red knots, how many crabs can we harvest, or should we harvest? You know, this represents the range of possible harvest recommendations. And just to reiterate, this is sex-specific maximum harvest. So as of right now, we have 210,000 females as a maximum and 500,000 males. These values originated when we originally set up, when we formed the original ARM framework. And really, there's nothing, you know, magic about these numbers. These were just numbers that all stakeholder groups could agree upon at the time, and the ARM subcommittee has just retained those through time. And you know, what tells us the how much we can harvest are what's known as the harvest policy functions. And really, what they are is just a suite of mathematical equations, so that once we have an estimate of the number of birds and the number of crabs, we can put those as input into these mathematical equations, and it spits out how many crabs we can harvest. And it's these harvest policy functions, these mathematical equations, are what are really solved for in order to maximize the long-term reward of the entire framework. In general, the harvest policy functions recommend harvest level. The recommended harvest levels coming from the harvest policy functions increase as both red knots and horseshoe crab populations will increase. So, you know, this is just a table and graph depicting the historic harvest implementation under the ARM framework over the years. You know, the first harvest recommendation was made in 2013 from the original framework, and you know, it recommended 500 male only harvest, you know, 0 females. And that continued up through 2022. In yellow there are the 3 years so far that would have occurred under the new ARM framework. And you can see once we move to the new ARM framework, females were allowed to be harvested. The column there in green for total allocation, that's what you know, that's what the states, the combined states can actually harvest, and this accounts for the fact that not all crabs in Maryland and Delaware waters are of Delaware Bay origin. So that accounts for that and allows a bit more harvest. Then in the maroon color, the board decision as to what to harvest. Ultimately, you know, the board has the final say, and the reason why for male harvest historically was higher than even the allocation, because the management board, back when Addendum 7 was adopted, would have been back in 2012, the management board also put into there a contingency that if there is 0 female harvest, we would have a 2-to-1 male offset when implementing that 0 female harvest. And that was to kind of make up for the reduction in female harvest for the states of Maryland and Virginia. So that's why those numbers are a bit higher than the total allocation. And then finally, the last column of numbers there are the reported landings. This is what we actually observed then. You know, these are the numbers of Delaware Bay origin crabs that have been removed by the bait industry over time. And you can see, even though we've recommended upwards of 500 plus thousand male horseshoe crabs. What's actually landed has been well below even that level through time. Now, there are some females that have, even though the ARM harvest recommendations are 0 females or 0 Delaware Bay origin females, we do account for the possibility that some Delaware Bay origin females are harvested, and these would come from Virginia and some small portion of their landings that occurs west of the Coleregs line could be Delaware Bay origin females. So we do account for those possible removals and in the estimation of horseshoe crab abundance each year. So they are accounted for in our modeling. So the question is, obviously, are the ARM's predictions of population growth any good for red knots or male and female crabs? So back when we revised the ARM framework and put out the report in 2021, 2022, the underlying graphs on here were the model predictions of how populations would respond through time. At the top there are red knots, and then female and male horseshoe crabs. So since that time, the dashed vertical line represents the year 2019. And that was when we had the data, and that's when 2019 was the endpoint or stopping point for the data that we used to revise the ARM framework and the underlying population dynamics models. So since then, any data point to the right of that dashed line represents additional data, so we can kind of compare that to our model predictions to see how close were we. And it is kind of remarkable that for red knots, they fall almost exactly on the median predicted value through time since 2019. For horseshoe crabs, for both males and females, we're actually above, in recent years, we've actually been above the median predicted value that we came up with in 2019, especially for the females. So I would say, are our model predictions any good? For red knots, it seems like we're very good. And for even horseshoe crabs, it seems like our model predictions were actually conservative relative to what we've actually observed since that time. And finally, this is a comparison of harvest recommendations between the versions of the ARM model, ARM framework. In the original ARM framework that began implementation in 2012, our abundance estimates of horseshoe crabs came directly from those average catch per toe or density of horseshoe crabs from Virginia Tech that then get expanded to the entire size of the Delaware Bay population. And within the original ARM framework, one of the issues with it was that we had kind of a hard threshold that if the female horseshoe crab population should surpass 11.2 million, that would then trigger an immediate jump to the maximum harvest of horseshoe crabs. So what would have happened is we would have seen in 2023 and then again in 2025 going from 0 female harvest right up to 210,000 if we still continue to implement the original ARM framework. And you can see even in the other years, 2024 and for 2026, we're just below that 11.2 million threshold. So we'd be bouncing back and forth between 0 harvest and maximum harvest. Whereas in the ARM revision, if we look back in time and say we had that going back to 2013, yes, we would have recommended a female harvest during the entire time series, but we wouldn't have bumped up against that maximum allowable harvest in any of those years. So some real take-home messages from this is, that we want all stakeholders to recognize is that the ARM framework really includes two types of components. The first there is the technical components, which describe what is happening in the system. These are, what are the population dynamics of both species? How do horseshoe crabs influence red knots? The other component is the value-based components, and that's how satisfied does this make us? How satisfied are we with the level of horseshoe crab harvest? How satisfied are we with the number of birds out there and what they're doing? The The ARM uses the best available science and has undergone independent peer reviews. And the framework that we've established can be easily updated with new science and new data through time. It's our population dynamics models and our estimation models are really based upon our routine monitoring data for both species. And so far, the ARM's predictions have been pretty aligned with the empirical data, the observed data that we've seen since we made our initial predictions, back in 2022. And the ARM harvest recommendations maximize the long-term, the long-term conditions for horseshoe crab and red knot abundance. So that's important to keep in mind. We're looking over, when we make a harvest recommendation, it's over the entire, into the future as well, not just specific to this year. So I guess with that, we can take questions.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Yeah, that was great, John. And yeah, appreciate everyone's patience with those technical issues, but despite that, we still have plenty of time for questions, and we already see some hands up, so I'd say we should dive in. I think I saw Joanne's first. Joanna, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Now we can, yep.
It's not, this was very good, and thank you very much for your presentation. I'm still uneasy with not including the egg data, and that's a fundamental assumption. And from your presentation, and from the first presentation, it sounds like that's not an issue that you necessarily want to discuss. So I just wanted to get that out on the table.
That, yeah, I mean, the egg density data, I don't know how deeply we want to dive into that. That's, for this go around, for what we're trying to elicit from stakeholders right now, we're not diving into the technical details of, the population dynamics of the species and the parameterizations of the model. But we certainly hear the concern about not including egg density data, and we certainly recognize that that is the direct link between the two species. And the pros and cons to including it, I mean, we have, that has been debated back and forth between everyone for a long time.
If I could just jump in, this is Caitlin. I wanted to just add that, as John said, again, this is not something that we're able to focus on with this specific process, but as I mentioned in my section, the ARM is continually something that is intended to be updated with additional scientific data. So there are going to be future opportunities to potentially look into that. So I don't want to say it's impossible. I just want to let people know that this isn't something we're able to do as part of this specific process.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So what we're discussing is the utility function of whether or not we're happy with the current decisions about what would be an appropriate level for either knots or horseshoe crabs.
Yes,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a fair.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Yeah, that's a good way to characterize it. So it's, how satisfied are you with the bird population, at various levels of bird abundance? How happy are we with the amount of horseshoe crab harvest at various levels of crab abundance, or within that range of zero harvest to maximum harvest?
But presumably the Fish and Wildlife Service, when they did their evaluation of this being endangered in the first place, and in their discussions of a recovery plan, have a concept of how many red knots they think there should be to have been reached recovery. So that's not really our value judgment here, is it?
I think it could be used to help inform your value judgment.
Okay,
I mean,
that's reasonable.
Certainly, we know a lot more about red knots now than what we did years ago, and certainly the recovery criteria can help inform the utility on red knots. That's something that we can delve into in great detail, especially during the in-person workshop.
So I would like to put on the table in the in-person workshop that question of what should be the appropriate number. And the reason I say that is I have been involved with some fisheries issues where the issue in the case of the fisheries is, in some cases, is how much fish do we need and how much fish do people consume. And for those values, they often use current consumption of fish value to say, well, okay, we have to make sure that that amount of fish consumption doesn't result in excess, say, mercury exposure. So one of the issues with red knots is figuring out not what we think the current horseshoe crab population could support, but what should the red knot population be given current resources or amount of coastline or some other value? Are those the kind of things we could discuss at the workshop?
Yeah, I'll quickly take this one. Yes, those are, and thanks for raising this, Joanna. I think these are exactly the types of questions that it's helpful for us to hear so that we can put together the right background information that you all need to inform your value judgments at the workshop. And so we do have Wendy Walsh is on the line here and also listening, and she's the recovery lead for Red Knots, and she will be at the workshop in January, and we'll probably have her actually give a bit of a presentation, about kind of what are the recovery plans look like, what are the numbers look like, and sort of share that baseline information with everybody so that everybody, all the participants at the workshop have that information before we ask you about your value judgments.
I think that would be a good idea because part of the value judgment might well be, given the number of red knots that we're shooting for in terms of a recovery plan, is that an appropriate value number to think about in terms of what the popular dynamics might be on the breeding ground and what distances of populations there need to be to have the appropriate social interaction between the birds themselves, which at some level is in fact a human value judgment. Anyway, this was really very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for the presentations.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
You're welcome. Again, I apologize for the difficulty with my mic and delay at the beginning.
Get a few other hands up.
Yeah. Carly you have Carly, Joanna Berger just went, and then, so Carly and David.
So I had a question about the trawl surveys that are conducted and incorporated into the population abundance for horseshoe crabs. You said that they had taken place in New Jersey, Virginia, and Delaware, right? Is there a reason why there aren't trawl surveys conducted in all of the Delaware Bay region states? And then my second question is, do all of those trawl surveys happen at the same time or like during the same time of year to make sure that you're getting a good subsample of the population?
So the New Jersey trawl survey occurs along the coast of New Jersey, from the mouth of Delaware Bay up along the coast of New Jersey. That one's conducted, the version of that we use is conducted in the spring. The Delaware trawl survey is conducted inside of Delaware Bay in the spring. And then the Virginia Tech trawl survey samples along the coast from just above the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay on up, and it overlaps a great deal with the New Jersey trawl survey. Now the Virginia Tech survey, it's called it's Virginia Tech survey because Virginia Tech runs it, but they don't actually sample in Virginia waters. And that survey is all conducted in the fall. And the original intent for when that survey was developed was it was going to be conducted in the fall because, perfect slide. That shows, the extent of the Virginia Tech survey.
Okay.
And they also, in more recent years, have also sampled somewhat in the lower Delaware Bay itself.
Is there a difference between the results that you see in the spring versus the fall?
Well, what we do is, we've always had the assumption that what's caught in the Virginia Tech survey in the fall is lagged forward to represent what's going to be available in the spring, for spawning. And it's a little difficult to say we catch more crabs in the spring versus fall, because the Virginia Tech survey is conducted in the fall, but the Virginia Tech survey has specialized fishing gear. The trawl is specifically designed to scour the substrate and be more efficient at catching horseshoe crabs. So in the raw catch, the raw catch per toe data, Virginia Tech always does have a much greater catch rate, in terms of like average catches per toe of a trawl than what the New Jersey trawl survey does or the Delaware Bay trawl survey does. It's not that the Delaware or New Jersey trawls are bad. It's just that they're less efficient at catching crabs. But again, they're still tracking. All of them show a similar trend in their average catch per toe and abundance indices through time. It's just the Virginia Tech is just better at catching them if the trawl actually encounters crabs. So there's a good chance that for example, the Delaware or the New Jersey trawl survey, goes over crabs, but the probability of a crab actually getting caught in the trawl is not as great as it is in the Virginia Tech survey, just because of a difference in gear types.
Thank you.
And John, just to confirm, I think the thing I heard was, even though there's some difference in seasonality, that the fall surveys, there's the same kind of underlying population that's being estimated, so that seasonality is accounted for in the model.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Carly. David, next.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Carly, for your questions, because it was a good segue into mine. John, the Delaware Bay finfish survey was never used in the original ARM model. It's now incorporated through the CMSA, and as is the New Jersey trawl. Given that they're not as effective at capturing crabs, why did the ARM committee decide to give each of those surveys equal weight in the CMSA? That's my understanding. And then a related question is, since the time of the original reward function was defined during the first sort of ARM/stakeholder process, has that reward function been changed because now we have more data that might now bump up what the original horseshoe crab population was prior to incorporation of those surveys?
Okay, Dave, for your first question about just the original ARM only used the Virginia Tech trawl survey. The original intent of the Virginia Tech trawl survey, if we go back to 2000, when it was originally conceptualized, the whole intent of that was to ultimately get to a catch survey analysis, which is the whole reason why Virginia Tech started to partition their catches, by sex and then also by life stage. So your juveniles, your primiparous crabs, and your multiparous crabs. So ultimately, the Virginia Tech survey was designed specifically with a catch survey analysis in mind into the future once enough data were collected. One of the big reasons why we changed that into the catch multiple survey analysis was because of the years when Virginia Tech lost funding. So the good thing is, they all track abundance. Of course, as I said, Virginia Tech is more efficient at catching horseshoe crabs, per unit of effort. But the beauty of having multiple surveys now in the overall catch multiple survey analysis is that if something should happen, the funding, a vessel breakdown, if something should happen that one of the surveys for whatever reason can't be run in a year, we still have those other 2 surveys that we can still continue to run the catch multiple survey analysis on. And also, more data sources, more sources of information is always a good thing. Because like I said earlier, one example here is, the extremely oddball year with those huge, a few tows from the Virginia Tech survey that increased the abundance to just astronomically unbelievable levels. By having the other surveys and running the catch multiple survey analysis, it brings it back down into more realistic levels. So hopefully that answers your question on why we wanted to include those other surveys.
No, John, the question was really, why are the 3 surveys given equal weight in the CMSA?
Okay.
Not questioning the inclusion of that. Although originally, when the first iteration of the framework was developed, the Delaware finfish trawl in Delaware Bay was discounted as not being valuable, but now it is valuable. That's a different question. I don't want to get into that right now. I'm just really interested in the sort of the justification for the equal weights of the 3 surveys in the CMSA.
They're not actually equally weighted. What also goes into the CMSA is the coefficient of variation on catches. And what happens is the Virginia Tech trawl survey generally, in most years, except that one real outlier year recently, has always had a lower CV than the other 2 surveys. So what that does when you come out with our final population estimates, the surveys are essentially weighted by the inverse of their CV. So what happens is our final CMSA population estimates will more closely follow what we get from the Virginia Tech survey than the other 2 surveys, because there's, because the coefficient of variation is less on the Virginia Tech survey. So we let the data tell us how it should be weighted and how the model should fit. We don't implicitly upfront say, well, we trust Virginia Tech a lot more than the other 2 surveys, so we're gonna, give that a weight of 0.5 and the other 2 surveys a weight of 0.25. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that the coefficient of variation is in some way creating its own weighting system based on the data. I understand that. I mean, there are some other issues, and I don't want to suck up all the time here because it looks like we're getting near the end of this. And I can ask that other question, John, about the change in the reward function. I mean, that we can answer that on another time, maybe at the end of January, because I think that's an important one as well.
Yeah, I mean, real briefly, the reward function in the original ARM framework, really, that reward function was totally horseshoe crabs and horseshoe crabs alone. If and when you could harvest them, and then what was the total value you could get out of that harvest. The revised reward function incorporates both crab, the amount of crabs that you can harvest plus bird abundance, so that you can't get there's just no way you can get all of your reward from horseshoe crabs. In order to get maximum reward, you also need high bird abundance.
Yeah, I don't remember it that way, John, but you and I can talk about that when we see each other.
But yeah, originally the reward function in the original ARM was really just made up of the amount of crabs that you could harvest.
Okay.
And obviously the number that you could harvest was kind of constrained by bird and crab abundance.
And just to jump in quickly, this is something that we'll dig into more in the following educational sessions, is more focus on the reward utility and harvest policy functions.
And then, this is one of those things that's up for change too, with input.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
I see Joanna Berger's hand up still. I'm not sure if it's from before though. Joanna, are you done? Is your question answered, or do you have a new one? Okay.
No, I just think that we need a lot more information on thinking about the value-based versus the way as biologists we normally think about population dynamics. We're thinking about a different set of values than
Mhm.
That's a good segue into what comes next.
yeah.
That is a good segue, and that's maybe because I'm not seeing any other hands up or questions in the chat, so I might maybe try and summarize a little bit of anyway, just kind of move us into wrapping up for today. Our goal for today was to make sure to give enough input, or sorry, to give enough background on the technical components. Well, first of all, to give you just a broad overview of kind of the history of the development of the framework, and then as we're hearing even through some of these questions, there's a lot of you that have a lot of information and a lot of knowledge about the technical components. And exactly to your point, Joanna, we haven't spent a lot of time exploring this part yet. We really just spent a little bit of time introducing that today. This is exactly where we're going to focus in the next educational session, and then obviously the focus of the January workshop itself. But wanted to lay out this kind of more holistic structure, so that you can kind of see where the different pieces are and recognize what's a technical judgment and what's a value judgment. But yeah, for so all of these things, like what you just mentioned, Joanna, are important, again, for us to hear. Like if there's more information that you think you need on a certain topic, like please give us that feedback so that we can make sure that we bring all the right information to the next sessions. And so where we're heading next is we'll see you on January 5th and or the 8th. And I just wanted to take a second and explain that, why there's two dates for a second. So essentially we polled all of the folks who are going to be participating in the January workshop, the in-person one on the 29th and 30th. And this date today worked for everybody, but we couldn't find another date for a second educational session that worked for everybody. So we said, okay, let's split it up. We had two times that collectively worked for everybody. What I'll say though is that, again, this next one, we wanted to get more of the kind of information out in this session. These sessions on the 5th and the 8th, I think we'll do a deeper dive into those utility and harvest and reward functions, and have a lot more time than we did today for question and answer and discussion. And so we would encourage you, especially if you are an active participant in the workshop and you're available to make both of these, we encourage you to attend both, because there might be different questions at both. We might get into slightly different discussions. And so, encourage you, you don't have to just pick one. But in terms of the sort of presentation material, we'll be presenting the same stuff at both. But again, that chunk of the agenda will be smaller for those January sessions than it was today. So definitely attend. Make sure you attend one of them. But again, I encourage you to attend both if you can. And then we'll be prepping for that the in-person workshop, which will be the 29th and 29th and 30th of January. And we'll talk more about that. Or Caitlin, I don't know if there's anything you want to add logistics-wise about any of the upcoming sessions or the workshop.
Yeah, so you will use the same link that you used for this session. It should send you a reminder email before the session, either a day before and an hour before maybe, to give you the link to log in again. But I will also send out a reminder with the link just in case. And it might be good to log in a few minutes early, especially if you had any audio issues. So we'll make sure we have John sorted on that call before we get started, since that one came out of nowhere today. But yeah, I think if you have any questions between now and then that come up in your mind, please email us so that we can maybe address those at the next sessions.
Where are you thinking of having the meeting the 29th and 30th?
Yeah, so I should have sent it. I think you should have gotten an email about that, but it's going to be held in Ocean City, Maryland. So that information is forthcoming. I wanted to mention this at this meeting so you all know it's coming. I will be sending out another email that has a travel authorization for the selected participants, so that you'll be able to submit for reimbursement after the workshop. But I will send out an email tomorrow with all of the details about the location and everything you need to know about booking your travel.
All right, that takes care of one of the questions in the question box. I do see Carly, you have your hand raised. Do you have a quick question?
Yes, thank you. It may be helpful, this is a recommendation, for those who aren't able to attend both of those educational sessions, to take meeting minutes or have a recording, so that people can review any questions that they may have not had the opportunity to see or think about, because I have monitoring scheduled, so I don't think I'll be able to attend both, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we will definitely, sorry, we'll definitely be recordings of every single one of these webinars, and we'll make sure for the one on the 5th to get that recording out as quickly as possible so that folks can watch it before the 8th if they're not able to make the 5th or the 8th. But there will be recordings and slide decks and everything materials wise posted for all of the sessions.
Yeah, thanks for the suggestion. And yeah, and we'll also, Brian and I will be putting together some, pre-reading materials before the workshop itself as well. And so part of that, I'm certain will include kind of some, a summary of like some key questions that we heard, and some, like think of it like an FAQ. We'll put together something like that before the in-person workshop as well. All right, we're a couple minutes over, but I think we've hit all the questions, and just want to be respectful of folks' time and let you take off if you need to. I do see I see a hand from Joanna. I don't know if that's a new one or an old one. We can hang on for a minute and see what that's about. But yeah, just want to thank everybody for attending today. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you again in early January.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.